So Zuckerberg was on Joe Rogan, and I know that many of you have an extreme aversion to anything Zuckerberg or Facebook. But I'm here to tell you, I don't think he's the cyborg evil one as you think he is. He's definitely not a pot of roses. But I've got a handful in my hand that are like Satan, and you're just looking at a useful minion.
When we take down something that we're not supposed to, I mean, that is like, that's the worst. I mean,
how
that's
do you
like
discern? Like how, like.
So I watched him in that part, and he's really filtering hardcore. I think he's probably realized that trying to control himself in body language didn't help him in any way, shape, or form, because now we're actually seeing movement. It was like, oh, so we're going to get the honest cyborg today, which is always a plus. So he's doing a whole lot of filtering, and you notice in the stuttering, or actually it wasn't really a stutter, but the pause in his speech, that it is an extreme filter. It's like, oh, okay, so dance around this.
Say like these Christian Facebook pages, I don't know how they found out that 19 of 20 were fake, but if someone just says, I am Bob Smith, and they post as Bob Smith, and they have a photograph, but really what they're doing is trying to talk shit about Joe Biden and get people to vote Republican in the midterms. Like how do you know whether someone's real or not? Like this is the big argument with Elon and Twitter, because Elon asked Twitter, like, what percentage of your website is filled with bots? And they say 5%. And he says, I don't believe you. I think it's higher. And let's find out how you've come to this conclusion.
Yeah.
And, you know, I believe they said that they just took 100 random Twitter pages and looked at the interaction, and there's some sort of an algorithm they applied to it. But how do you discern?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think estimating the overall prevalence is one thing, but I think that the question of looking at a page and is this page authentic, I think that
he's filtering again. You can see that in his eyes and the way he's talking. I was watching his mouth, and he's filtering again so extreme in this that he closes his mouth just tightly and momentarily. It's like, okay, this is interesting. I'm hoping that questions are asked that actually reveal what he's trying not to say, because all we can see right now is that it's a whole bunch of filtering. And unless key words are used on these people, you won't see it. It also is very hard to read when the questions are being answered and it's not on the individual that is going to be answering the question. All you see is the person talking.
A bunch of signals around that. One of the things that we try to do is for large pages, we try to make sure that we know who the admin of that page is. We don't necessarily, you should be able to run an anonymous page. You don't necessarily need to out yourself and say who you are running it, but we want to make sure that we sort of have like an identity for that person on file, so that way we know, like at least behind the scenes, that that person is real. For certain political things, I think having a sense of...
So he switches over to the political. So for certain, and you see a whole lot of body movement in that. He shifts in his chair, moves around, settles in, but he sits straighter. So this is a stressor.
What country they're originating from. I mean, some of that you can do just by looking at where their server traffic comes from. Like, is the IP address coming from Romania, or because if it's like an ad in some other country's election, then you probably want to make sure that that ad is especially in countries that have laws around that, are coming from someone who's a valid citizen, or like at least in that place. So there's a bunch of, I think, I don't know, one.
So as he speaks about this part, we aren't seeing the stress. Literally, instead of going through the filtering part, this is the doing part. This is what we actually do. Like, okay, that's legitimate.
Theme in my worldview around this stuff, and when it gets to some of the stuff that we talked about before, is like, I don't think that this stuff is black and white, or that you're ever going to have like a perfect AI system. I think it's all trade-offs all the way down, right? And you could build a system, and you can either be overly aggressive and capture a higher percent of the bad guys, but then also by accident take out some number of good guys, or you could be a little more lenient and say, okay, no, the cost of taking out any number of good guys is too high, so we're going to tolerate having just a little bit more more bad guys on the system. These are values questions, right?
tolerate more bad guys on the system, and the body wiggles around. I'm going to sit there and say this part is probably knowledge of the bad guys. I'm going to tolerate more bad guys on the system. And he doesn't like it. That's why you see the twist in the body. And I guess in the mindset of him anyways, you have to ask yourself as a spectator, well, what kind of bad guys are we talking about? Are we talking, black market caviar or black market, some really bad illegal shit?
Around what do you value more? And those are super tricky questions. And part of what I've struggled with around this is I didn't get into this to basically judge those things. I got into this to design technology that helps people connect, right? It's like,
So he filters that. I didn't get in this to judge those things. I got in it, and then the truth of the body came out. It relaxed. It starts to move. The body's in a positive movement. I just got in here to design tech. That's all I want to do. So this overlord, in his body language, his truth is he just wants to design tech. I got no problem with that. But again.
And you could probably tell when we spent the first hour talking about the metaverse and the future of basically building this whole technology roadmap to basically give people this realistic sense of presence. It's like, that's what I'm here to do, right? So this whole thing that's like arbitrating what is okay and what is not, I obviously have to be involved in that because this is at some level, I run the company and I can't just abdicate that. But I also don't think that as a matter of governance, you want all of that decision-making vested in one individual. So I think one of the things that our country and our government gets right is the separation of powers. So, one of the things that I try to...
So now we start to see a whole lot of mouth swallowing. The body is starting tiny jerks because it's coming in tight to itself. So the stress is going up.
We created this oversight board. It's an independent board that basically we appointed people whose kind of paramount value is free expression, but they also balance that with things like when is there going to be real harm to others in terms of safety or privacy or other human rights issues.
And then again, you see another shift in this. His body shifts on it and it's very tight. So a whole lot of stress. So it's like, okay, so you've got this board that you supposedly created and it gives you a lot of stress. So we see him being truthful that he doesn't want to judge people. He just wants to design tech. And then on the other hand, he's got to talk about this board that gives him a lot of stress. That's all right. So we're not seeing tells of deception on this board. We are seeing a whole lot of stress on this board. It's like, okay, so what's going on?
And basically that board, people in our community can appeal cases to when they think that we got it wrong. And that board actually gets to make the final binding decision, not us. So in a way, I actually think that is a more legitimate form of governance than having just a team internally that makes these decisions or, maybe some of them go up to me, although I don't spend a ton of my time on this on a day-to-day basis. But
actually, that was quite truthful. I don't spend a ton of time on a day-to-day basis. Also, okay, so you do spend time on it, but it's not a ton. He's got that swallowing. He keeps doing his mouth. It's gone really dry. I don't know if he's been drinking something, because you know what it is like on Joe Rogan's show. But it has increased as he's been speaking about this.
I think it's generally good to have some kind of separation of powers where you're architecting the governance so that way you have different stakeholders and different people who can make these decisions. And it's not just like one private company that's making decisions even about what just happens on our platform.
How do you guys handle things when they're a big news item that's controversial? Like there was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York
we
Post.
had that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. Basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that.
Okay, so we're doing a lot of filtering again, but he's not being deceptive. We're not seeing that tell. We see a whole lot of high stress, but we don't see deception. There's not a believe me look. There's emphasis, but there's not a believe me look. The FBI really did came to Zuckerberg and told them, hey, we got some problems and there's going to be, this kind of stuff coming.
Just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it. You could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful. But basically, a lot of people were still able to share it. We got a lot of complaints that was the case. Obviously this is a hyper political issue. So depending on what side of the political spectrum, you either think we didn't censor it enough or censored it way too much. But we weren't sort of as black and white about it as Twitter. We just kind of thought, hey, look, if the FBI, which I still view as a legitimate institution in this country, it's like very professional law enforcement, if they come to us and tell us that we need to be on guard about something, then I want to take that seriously.
Did they specifically say you need to be on guard about that story?
No, I don't remember if it was that specific.
Okay, so we're walking that back. Don't say it. Don't say it. Close the eyes, hide, come up with something, and then change. So it's like, okay. So the FBI would appear to be extremely involved in Facebook. And Facebook, on a legality measure, has exported all their decision making. I mean, really, what are you going to do? You own a company that the government doesn't really like what you do all the time because they can't completely control you. And yet you've got the public that will lynch you if you don't, do their way. And you can see it coming. I'd want somebody else to make those decisions and it not be me too. At the same time, play nice with the guy that's legally allowed to lynch you. Welcome to 2022, people. Soon it'll be 2023. And nothing is as it seems.
But it basically fit the pattern.
When something like that turns out to be real, is there regret for not having it evenly distributed and for throttling the distribution of that story?
What do you mean evenly distributed?
I mean evenly in that it's not suppressed. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because it turned out after the fact. The fact checkers looked into it. No one was able to say it was false, right? So basically, it had this period where it was getting less distribution. So yeah. I mean, but I think I think it sucks though. I think in the same way that probably having to go through a criminal trial but being proven innocent in the end sucks. It still sucks to have that you had to go through a criminal trial, but at the end you're free. So it's I don't know if the answer would have been don't do anything or don't have any process. I think the process was pretty reasonable. We still let people share it, but obviously you don't want situations like that.
But it's certainly much more reasonable than Twitter's stance, and it's probably also the case of armchair quarterbacking, right? Or at least Monday morning quarterbacking, I should say. Because in the moment, you had reason to believe, based on the FBI talking to you, that it wasn't real and that there was going to be some propaganda. So what do you do?
Yeah.
And then if you just let it get out there, and what if it changes the election and it turns out to be bullshit? That's a real problem. And I would imagine that those kind of decisions are the most difficult. The decisions of what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Yeah. I mean, what would you do in that situation?
I don't know what I would do. I would have to really thoroughly. Well, first of all, you're dealing with the New York Post, which is one of the oldest newspapers in the country. So I would say I would want to talk to someone from the New York Post, and I would say, how did you come up with this data? Where are you getting the information from? How do you know whether or not this is correct? And then you have to make a decision because they might have got duped. It's hard because everybody wants to look at it after the fact. Now that we know that the laptop was real and then it was a legitimate story and there is potential corruption involved with him, what we think, that should not have been restricted. That should not have been banned from sharing on Twitter. Right.
So this is a great side view because you get to see him reacting to Rogan as he asks or talks about what the conversation is about. When you see him agreeing a lot, speaking on Zuckerberg, constantly agreeing with a lot. And then he gets to a part, he does some stretching, he moves his shoulder, relaxes, and he talks about, Rogan does anyways, about the corruption. And it's not a negative head shake from Zuckerberg in the sense of no. It's more like I'm going to swirl my head to the negative, but in a way that submits at the same time and gets away from it. He doesn't want to touch it. Which just goes with the part of, I'm outsourcing all the decision making because I don't want to touch that either. If you like it, please share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
To be notified of all videos that get released, because not all of them can be posted here, in the description is a link to our Telegram channel, and if you subscribe, you'll be notified of every single video, and we don't spam it with anything else other than video releases.